Day one of Denver Broncos training camp was in the books on Wednesday at the UCHealth Training Center. Russell Wilson made his training camp debut, but the Broncos defense shined. We tell you all about it on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every single day. Thank you so much, Broncos country, for tuning in and making Locked on Broncos your first listen of the day on your favorite podcast providers or on YouTube. We have you covered. Make sure you hit that subscribe, that like, and that follow button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Senior Broncos Analyst, Mile High Sports, joined alongside by my co-host, Sayre, Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, day one of Broncos camp in the books. A lot of good energy, a lot of fan enthusiasm on the Berm and Dove Valley. As you all can tell, I got a little sunburnt, but had a lot of good recaps, talking with a couple players as they came off the field. But man, day one in the books, Broncos football is officially here.
Feels great. It feels really great just seeing the players run out of the locker room and run out onto the practice field, getting updates about which guys are first and second and third and 18th on the practice. I love it all, Cody. I love every single update. And it's just great to see the players and coaches and everybody. Football is back, right? That's what it's all about right now. Football is back, and everything is back to, quote unquote, normal for us, as far as we get to have some fun now, talking about things that are happening on the field. And I think, man, there's plenty to discuss from day one, even though the players aren't in pads, even though, they're just kind of still in almost the install period. I think there's plenty to take away from this practice.
Tons to take away because there was individual periods, there was group red zone work, and look, the defense looked really, really good so far here on day one. So let's get into our recap here. The Broncos defense, really the storyline on day one, shining. Now for them, we talked about on the show, they bring back a lot of key starters from last season, some new faces. And so for the Broncos first team defense, we got to see a lot. You got to see Deshaun Williams start a defensive end opposite of Draymond Jones. And then you saw DJ Jones working in there with the first team defense. That nose tackle position, Jonas Griffith, the inside linebacker next to Josie Jewell. And then obviously your secondary was Surtain, Darby, and then you also have K'Wan Williams, Justin Simmons, Kareem Jackson, and they were flying all around, and especially in the red zone period, they stood out in a big way. But a player who stood out in a big way was PJ Locke, and this is someone that we've talked about here on the show, Locked on Broncos, about maybe being that third safety, and I had a chance to catch up with PJ after practice, and he even told me a little bit, too, about his role. He's just so comfortable back there. He had 2 pass breakups in the red zone period, coming away, breaking on the football, reading the quarterback, understanding the route concept, and driving on it. And he prevented 2 touchdowns from happening when he was in there, but also playing a little bit in the dime, where he says to him, it feels like second nature to him to play there, because that's where he played in college, was inside the nickel in the slot, and he didn't transition to safety until he made it to the NFL. So PJ Locke was locked on here, day one of Broncos camp.
Well, I think that was one of the things I was most surprised to hear based on the interview that you did with him after practice, the fact that he never played safety really in college. And that surprised me mainly because I feel like that's just kind of how he's built, right? He's built like a safety. He's almost built like a linebacker, really, when you look at him. And to hear that he played primarily the nickel at Texas, and he even talked about in your interview, he's learned a few things from Caden Stearns about that position. I find that fascinating. And I also find it fascinating that he's kind of, it's not his fault or anything. He's kind of stealing the headlines that we all thought maybe Caden Stearns would be getting this offseason. Like, remember back at OTAs, he was the guy that was in the starting lineup with Justin Simmons, and I say starting lineup, it's OTAs, but he was the guy out there when Kareem Jackson was not present at OTAs. So very, very interesting developments here, Cody. I kind of want to stir the pot, maybe overreact a little bit. I mean, if it's in the Broncos' best interest long term, does PJ Locke end up as a starter at some point this year? I know we've toyed with the idea maybe Kareem Jackson floats into that dime role when the Broncos go into that formation, and maybe PJ Locke kicks back. One way or another, I know that there's a role for him in this defense, and he's just consistently made plays and standing out to everybody that's seen in practice, whether it's OTAs or training camp.
One thing he told me too, this offseason in his training, he carried over a lot of his training stuff from what the playbook is going to require him to do defensively. And you could just tell, I mean, he's playing out there at full speed. He doesn't have to think about anything. I mean, he's just going and he's learning behind Justin. He's learning behind Kareem Jackson. And look, I think here's the thing. Day two going into training camp, can PJ build on that? Can he continue to make plays? But more so on day two, can Caden Stearns jump out and make some plays? To me, that is one thing I'm really interested in seeing because I think that safety group, gosh, they have so much talent. You look at all the guys there, Delarian Turner, Yale, Jamar Johnson was working in with the third team defense. You want to see a little bit more from him. This is a big year for him, but PJ Locke right now, still in the headlines, even though Justin Simmons had an interception of Russell Wilson today at some point. But man, PJ is definitely one player to watch, which is very interesting considering he played 83% of the team's special team snaps in 2021 and only very minimal defensive snaps last season, but did get some reps. Caden Stearns got more defensive reps than PJ did last year, but they're kind of the opposite in a sense on different units and different play styles there. So for me, it's like, hey, can Caden Stearns make plays in day two to stand out to maybe kind of even that? Because right now, PJ Locke appears to be ahead in the race as we talk about that ongoing safety competition at Broncos training camp. But Broncos country coming up here in just a moment, it was more than just PJ Locke there were some other defensive players and a surprise on the offensive side of the ball who stood out in a big way. We continue to recap day one of Broncos training camp here on the Lockdown Broncos podcast. But before we do that, let me tell you about our good friends over there at Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar that is out there on the market. Each bar is covered in 100% milk chocolate. They also have the Puffs, which is a limited flavor. They have a whole wide variety cookie dough chunks, s'mores, and even coconut brownie chunk puffs available at built.com here today. Each bar contains 17 grams of protein, 130 calories, and only 4 grams of sugar. And I want you and your family to try a box of Built Bar here today if you have not done so already, or if you love Built Bar, continue to go there and buy it and get 15% off when you use promo code LOCK15 at checkout. Once again, promo code LOCK15 gets you 15% off your next order at built.com. Day one of Broncos camp in the books here. Complete coverage and recap here on the Lockdown Broncos podcast every single day. And we have it covered all year long because for the true fan, there is never an offseason. Thank you so much for making Lockdown Broncos your first listen of the day. Sayre, some other standouts at training camp. There's quite a few players there. I think a lot of people have pinpointed Jonas Griffith as one of those guys. I personally thought that Bradley Chubb and Malik Reed and Baron Browning, I thought all three of those guys had really good first days. But for you, let's talk about Jonas Griffith, who right now is the prime favorite, got a lot of the reps at the first team defense next to Josie Jewell at linebacker. He looked really good with his size and his technique, his instincts on run plays, on certain plays on the outside, toss plays, or whether it be stretch plays. He was quick downhill and taking the appropriate angles. He seems very, very good so far. Granted, it's day one.
Well, the Broncos have put just a ton of confidence in him based on the players that they haven't gone after, right? You look back to free agency, you look back at the NFL draft, and even the post-draft free agency wave, the Broncos have really not done anything at that position. And all due respect to Alex Singleton, I feel like the Broncos really have just paved the way for Jonas Griffith to be that starter opposite Josie Jewell. And he continues to just draw positive reviews, right? Dating back to OTAs and George Payton talking about him during OTAs and this new coaching staff really raving about him and the progress that he's made. And then we see on Twitter a couple of pass breakups at practice today. And here you're talking about his ability to play the run, even without pads, just being in the right place at the right time, playing fast out there. That to me indicates, man, he's ready. He's ready to become maybe the biggest breakout player on this defense. And I know that's saying something because we all expect quite a bit from players like Baron Browning. We expect quite a bit from, other players in the defensive backfield like PJ Locke, who we talked about in the previous segment, or Michael Ojemudia, other players like that. But man, I think Jonas Griffith, he's primed. I took a shot in the dark earlier this offseason predicting him as the team's leading tackler. I think I feel pretty good about that at this point. I think he's going to make a big impact, and you love to see that. And you love to hear the defense having a big day. The offense has been the focus all offseason, right? Everybody's been talking about Russell Wilson. Everybody's been talking about the wide receivers and the weapons being so much better with Russell Wilson at the helm. And for the defense to go out there, we heard about Patrick Surtain having a PBU. We heard about great coverage in the red zone from Ronald Darby. All these different things. It's just great to hear for the Denver Broncos defense because, man, these guys, they're one of the top 5, top 10 units last year before the wheels kind of fell off late. I feel like they're out to prove something as well this year. And it just goes to show great leadership. Players follow great leadership on the field, right? Justin Simmons, he's a phenomenal leader. And I feel like he's really setting the tone for that side of the ball. He's not backing down from anybody. He went out on the
No.
Broncos. I don't know if you saw this, but man, when they had the live broadcast, Justin Simmons did a little quick interview before practice, and he was asked, "Hey, who's going to get that first interception off Russell Wilson?" He's like, "I am," and
And
he
he
had
did.
and he
He
did.
sure did.
So I love that confidence from him. He doesn't care who's out there at QB, but I think everybody realizes how much better Russell Wilson is making them, and for the defense to go out there and kind of make a statement on day one, it's awesome to see.
And another guy that stood out, he didn't work much with the first team offense, but worked a lot with the second and third team offense. Montreal Washington, we talk about the blazing fast kick returner. I tell you what, watching him return kicks and punts, he has this spring to him. And, he was running up the sideline in which I was standing on, and you can just hear like he's light on his feet, but he can put his foot in the dirt and change direction really, really quickly. He's got that bounce. But an interesting, as we talk about Montreal, he did have a touchdown catch. Brett Rippon had a pretty good day today for the Broncos, especially in the red zone period. And he found him in a perfect spot on a post pattern on the back of the end zone, right in the middle, right before he gets to the out of bounds, 2 feet in, toe tap. Montreal Washington scores a touchdown. But even at the return game, too, there's also Caden Davis, who's getting some return run there, and Trey Quinn. These are the three primary return options now for this Broncos team. I didn't get to see anybody else working in there. It was primarily those three guys when the Broncos did their special teams kickoff and kick return period. And tell you what, they have some speed, Sayre, and this might be a really good thing. And one thing, too, that they're doing in a drill that fans don't really always get to see. So when they kick the ball off, the returners already have a ball in their hands. And what they're doing is it forces them to hold their hands up closer to their chest. And then when the ball gets closer to them, they throw the other ball away, they field the new one, and then they return. Good stuff being implemented by Dwayne Stukes, a perfectionist on the special teams side of the ball. He stood out in a big way. But there's a guy on the offensive side of the ball, Sayre, that I really want to rave about a little bit. Had a really good day, in my opinion. Could be a little bit of a security blanket here for Russell Wilson. Eric Saubert stood out in a big way on day one of Broncos camp at the UCHealth Training Center. 2 touchdown catches for him. And man, tell you what, he knows how to use his size and his athleticism. I mean, he's a pretty versatile route runner. Like, you think of a guy who is as big as he is, that he'd kind of be slow. No, he's actually deceptively fast there. And one thing I noticed with him is positioning, especially on some sit and some comeback routes. He just uses his size and his advantage to box out defenders and to use his body. He understands how to attack against zone and man coverage. He might be a little bit of a secret weapon for Russ this upcoming season. Obviously, a good first day for him at Broncos camp. He was my offensive player of the day.
I love that too. I love hearing that because right now there's a great opportunity with Greg Dulcich still working on the sidelines and him, kind of recovering from that hamstring injury that he suffered there at OTAs. There's definitely an opening there at the tight end position, right? Albert Okwuegbunam is presumptive tight end 1, and that's great. I would love to see him be that guy this season. And if not him, it sounds like Greg Dulcich had a great OTAs, but with Dulcich on the mend and Albert Okwuegbunam's spot not necessarily set in stone, he hasn't been sharpied in there. There's an opportunity out there for a guy like Eric Saubert to come in and have a great training camp and prove that he deserves a bigger role on this team. I think a lot of players kind of got lost in the shuffle over the last few years just because the Broncos didn't have the best quarterback play, or at least the most consistent quarterback play, and certainly didn't have the most consistency in terms of how these guys are being utilized offensively. And Saubert is a guy that, dating back to his days at Drake, a lot of people really liked him. A lot of people like those physical traits that you mentioned, the fact that he's kind of a hulking 6'5" out there. So I love that he's having a great start to camp. It doesn't matter if it's one day, right? We try not to overreact to things. These are things that are being stacked up. And that's why guys start to get noticed, right? Because you start to stack up a lot of good publicity or a lot of good days, whether it's dating back to OTAs, whether it's things that coaches have said, or the general manager, George Payton, has said, or, him popping up at the Russell Wilson San Diego workouts. Those different things, they all stack up. And as it begins to add up, you see him get a couple of touchdowns on day one of training camp. Then all of a sudden that kind of just overflows and it becomes hey, maybe we should start paying attention to Eric Saubert out there because he did some good things last year. He's got some, nice publicity so far this year, and then a great start to training camp. It's good to hear that he's doing well. I think he's got a great opportunity before him.
We're very excited to see what the Broncos can continue to do and whether the offense can build on the installation process. Can Saubert build off of his strong day one performance on day 2 of Broncos camp? Can another tight end emerge and make some plays and score some touchdowns? Is a storyline to watch. But the Broncos offensive line is shuffling a little bit due to some injuries, and a familiar face has returned to the training camp roster. We dive into that coming up here in just a moment. But real quick, if you're a brand new listener or viewer of the Locked On Broncos podcast, we have you covered every single day, all year long, with all the Denver Broncos news, content, and coverage that you need. I'll be at every practice this season. I'll be at every game, home and away. And Sayre and I will come back and we'll break things down from an objective point of view for everybody in Broncos country. So if this is your first time listening or watching, do us a favor, hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on all the action here on the Locked On Podcast Network. The Broncos offensive line is undergoing changes with some new faces coming into the training camp roster on the first day of training camp. And Sayre, I was there first thing, early in the morning. We're setting up for Mile High Sports and get the notification that the Broncos have signed Cam Fleming, who was a veteran offensive addition that was on the roster last season for Denver, and that they waived Kadofi Wright. And the first thing I thought was, man, I feel bad for Kadofi Wright, undrafted rookie free agent, getting ready for your first training camp the morning of, and then you get the call like, hey, we're going to have to waive you. We have to make another roster signing. We're just really deep in this position right now. Feel for Kadofi Wright. I still think there's a scenario maybe that presents itself that could bring him back at some point here, but the Broncos roster fills out. Cam Fleming coming in as offensive tackle depth with Billy Turner being placed on the PUP list. Sayre, I just can't help but look at this and feel like the door is wide open for Calvin Anderson to really be the starter at right tackle for Denver this year.
It really is. If it wasn't wide open before, it certainly is now. And all due respect to Cam Fleming, who started a handful of games last year. And we talked a lot about Cam Fleming on this show, not necessarily for the best reasons, but when he did get onto the field, he did a pretty good job out there. So yeah. I think it's solid depth to have. And the reason why the Broncos brought back, in my mind, Cam Fleming versus somebody like Bobby Massey, who actually started the majority of games last year, is the fact that Cam Fleming can play a variety of positions out there for you. He's played left tackle. He's played right tackle. He's played offensive guard. Heck, I saw some clips of him online where he's the extra offensive lineman for some of the teams that he's played for. He's done a little bit of everything. I think that has value. And like you mentioned, with Billy Turner being on the PUP, he's not the only one that went on the PUP. Also, Tom Compton with a back injury, actually a back surgery to the PUP as well. So certainly some depth, maybe questions there. I think what we've talked about all offseason is we're wondering who's going to be the starting 5 for the Denver Broncos, but at the same time, not necessarily worried because they do have so many bodies out there. From the sounds of things, Billy Turner is progressing towards full health, whereas Tom Compton, you kind of wonder now with having a back surgery and that being the best situation for him, could he be maybe a mid-season or late season addition based on kind of the timing of all those different things? We don't know. And Nathaniel Hackett is very, very vague when it comes to injuries. And I think that's great. Just in terms of, you don't want to put a solid timeline. Remember, last year, it was a 2 to 4 week injury or whatever it was for Michael Ojemudia. He ended up not showing up until the last 2 weeks of the year. So you never know how these things are going to turn out. You don't put a hard timeline on it. But I think definitely with the offensive line kind of reshuffling, there's certainly openings for these young players to make an impact. And obviously you also had Greg Dulcich working to the side, different players kind of on the mend. But the biggest thing for me is you didn't have any issues, major issues, no carts coming out to practice, nobody going down and having to be helped off by the trainers. That's the best possible injury news that you could get from any single day of training camp.
Oh, spot on there too. And Dulcich, the Broncos feel very comfortable. From what I've been told, I was talking to several people there at training camp, and the Broncos feel very comfortable with where Greg Dulcich is at. And so, for them, they don't need to rush him back in from that hamstring because those soft tissue injuries, they can kind of re-aggravate. They know what he can do. He's not being brought in to be a blocking tight end as an inline guy. He will have to block inside the slot at times, which they're comfortable with, but they're mainly using him as an offensive threat, as a guy who can stretch the field across or vertically or on out or in breaking routes. They really believe in his speed and his ability to get open. But, we saw, you have a good security blanket in Eric Saubert in the event Greg Dulcich has to miss any time. Albert O was looking pretty decent as a blocker as well in line. We'll see if he gets more acclimated, if they use him a little bit more in the passing game. I had a chance to speak with Albert O off the record a little bit. We're just talking about how he's feeling. He says he feels great. His knee, his legs feeling good. He gave me some advice because I have a torn ACL right now on my left knee, and he told me about following this guy, Knees Over Toes, on Instagram, especially if those of you who have some back or some knee issues, a great follow. So I had to get that plug out there for from Albert O. He took good care of me there in terms of the conversation that we had. But, even another guy who suffered an injury at the end of mandatory minicamp, Tyree Cleveland. Tell you what's there. He was out there. He looked really good. Didn't look like the ankle was bothering him at all. He and Seth Williams are some under-the-radar guys I'd say the Broncos country should keep an eye on here in this wide receiver room.
I like that. I like having that extra depth and those other opportunities for players to kind of, maybe come in and make a splash. And I even know Benjamin Albright, our good friend, he tweeted out that maybe not enough people are talking about Trey Quinn. So
yep,
the wide receiver room has a variety of names out there right now. And I think Tyree Cleveland, after any time a guy gets carted off the field, I mean, certainly you fear for the worst, but to see him back out there, I know he was out at Russell Wilson's San Diego workout as well. To see him out there without any restrictions, it's fantastic. And I think for anybody that's wondering about how Russell Wilson practiced, and you could speak to this better than me, Cody, but I think we talk about the defense having a big day. That doesn't mean that Russell Wilson necessarily had a bad day either. And the offense made its play. So it sounds to me like Russell Wilson was kind of as advertised out there in his first training camp practice as a Denver Bronco.
No, he was. And, when he comes up under center and he's looking at the defense and he's calling something out, Justin Simmons calls something out because they're playing like this chess game with each other. They're checking in and out of different coverages or concepts, or they're killing something at the line of scrimmage offensively versus defensively. But no, I like, as good as the defense was, like Bradley Chubb had some good pressure on Russ in his face a couple times. Malik Reed had some good pressure. Baron Browning did a really good job setting the edge against the run here in day one. But, a lot of people are going to focus on, okay, yes, Russ threw an interception to Justin Simmons. Justin Simmons is a damn good safety, but how many people are going to talk about Cortland Sutton catching a pass in the middle of the field in between two defenders, a threaded dime by Russell Wilson for a touchdown? Russ looked good. Look, and here's the thing too. Like, you want the offense. They're installing a brand new scheme. This is the first real live action against each other that they're going to have. Yeah, they're going to have days where maybe they're sluggish or don't look the best, but Russ still looked pretty good, even though the Broncos defense looked really, really dang good in day one. And that sets us up for the table here for day two of Broncos camp. Can the offense make a couple more splash plays downfield against this Broncos defense that is flying around? They're very aggressive as the offense tries to get acclimated with a little bit more of this Broncos playbook here with Nathaniel Hackett. A huge storyline to watch. Sayre Bedinger and myself will have you covered tomorrow here, Locked on Broncos, for day two's recap of Broncos training camp. Not to mention, you can follow me on Twitter at Cody Roark NFL. I'll be providing live updates at practice. Make sure you follow Sayre as well at Sayre Bedinger. But Broncos country, thank you so much for tuning in. Day one Broncos recap here in Dove Valley at the UCHealth Training Center. A lot of storylines to follow because preseason is a long haul, and we can't wait to keep you covered here all throughout the preseason and throughout the regular season here, the Locked On Broncos podcast.